Hello, everybody. I wanted to check in and do a quick chat about the most recent book that I finished. It is called The Song of Achilles, and I wanted to first show my new Kindle. This is my new Kindle Voyage, um, which is awesome. This is the first book I've read on my new Kindle Voyage, which I'm calling Voyager, like Star Trek. So this is Voyager. This is going to be what I read my books on for the foreseeable future, and I loved it. But let me pull up. This is actually the color version of the cover of the Song of Achilles, and I'm in this room that has a bunch of windows in it, so it makes it for really good light, but it kind of makes it hard to see the glare on the iPad showing the colored cover for the Song of Achilles, written by Madeline Miller, and this was published back in 2012. This has been on. I have had a sample downloaded for this book since probably 2012, so probably 3 or 4 years now that I've been meaning to read this book, and I I just never read it, and I'm not real sure why. But I had the sample, like I said, and even when I was creating my 2016 TBR this year, I still didn't put it on the 2016 TBR. I only read it now, really, because I finished my list of 2016 reads on my TBR, and I'm just down to sort of wild card choices, and I decided to read it. And I am super duper glad that I did, because it turned out to be really, really, really good, and I enjoyed it immensely. So what it's about, when I read up on it, I heard it referred to as a retelling of the Iliad, by Homer, the ancient Greek myth about the Trojan War. But I think that's really a mistake to call it a retelling of the Iliad, because what it's really about is Patroclus. Achilles. Achilles and Patroclus, and their relationship. Patroclus is, if you don't know the story of the Iliad, and you didn't see the movie Troy with Brad Pitt playing Achilles, or you're not really familiar with Achilles and Patroclus at all, Patroclus and Achilles were I think the Iliad calls Patroclus, the beloved companion of Achilles, but then other ancient texts actually sort of, clarify for us that they were actually in a relationship with each other, in a loving relationship with each other, that was basically a lifelong thing. So this story, The Song of Achilles, is told from the point of view of Patroclus, and it starts out when they are children. Patroclus is he's a prince, a young prince. And I forget which kingdom he's from, but his father, he is not a warrior type. He is smallish. He's not good at at games, at sports, and things like that. And so his father is disappointed in him, and ultimately, through an accident that happens, he has to be exiled as a young boy, and he is sent to live with King Peleus, who is Achilles' father. Who Achilles' father takes in these wayward princes and nobility from around Greece. And sort of takes them in a place where exiles go. And so this is how Patroclus and Achilles, ultimately meet, and it's when they are children. And they are really quite opposite from each other. Patroclus is sort of this gentle, person, and Achilles, of course, is born to be a hero. He is half god. His mother is Thetis, who is a sea nymph. She was basically raped by Achilles' father. I'll talk more about women in the ancient world in a bit, because anyway, so they meet as children, and then so this story, I don't want to give a lot of it away because it was so good that I don't want to really even talk a lot about what happens in the action. I do want to say up front, though, if you don't know the story of the Iliad, it's fine. You don't need to know the story of the Iliad to really get into this story, because, as I said early on, this is not really a retelling. To me, it's not really a retelling of the Iliad. It is a telling of it is pulling a couple of characters from the Iliad, and then giving us, and then focusing on a sort of laser point on their relationship with each other. And so that's what the story's about to me, not so much about the Iliad. So it wasn't necessary for me to know the Iliad. And, I think some of the negative reviews I've read of this book come from people who love the Iliad as it is, and they were disappointed in, that the author, Madeline Miller, didn't mention this or that, or she glossed over this or that, or, she didn't treat the Iliad like they thought it should be treated. And so I didn't go into it expecting that. I went into it only from the point of view of Patroclus, and I loved it. I really did. So I don't think I want to give away much more about what happened between Patroclus and Achilles, how their relationship develops, other than to say, they do develop a relationship with each other. And then ultimately, of course, the Trojan War breaks out. And Achilles has to go to the war, and Patroclus does too, for reasons that are explained in the book. And so that's where I guess the majority of the action is. They are young boys in the kingdom there with where Achilles' father is, and then they are sent away eventually to school with a centaur, which was really cool, Chiron. That was nice. That was fun. But then ultimately they do have to go. They go to the Trojan War, which lasts a really, really long time, and they have sort of different roles in that war. Which the book goes into. But what I took away from the book, I mentioned earlier about women in the ancient world. Oh my gosh, this book is written by a woman, so it really has a female perspective, I think, and the role of women in ancient Greece and in the Iliad is like they're basically property, and they don't have a lot of rights otherwise. This sort of always sort of surprises me about ancient Greece, because Athens is their primary deity is Athena, a female goddess, but in this book, Achilles' mom, as I mentioned, is a goddess. She's a sea nymph, and being a goddess didn't even really help her as far as being overpowered by a mortal male, and she's basically raped, and she has to stay with him for like a year. So he repeatedly basically rapes her for this whole year, and of course she hates him, and she hates mortals. So she comes to visit Achilles. She does know his fate, because he's destined to be this hero, and she knows that, and so she hates Patroclus, though, because he's mortal. So she feels like he's not good enough for Achilles, and she never she's just she really tries her best to separate them, and so it doesn't work, obviously, but she really hates all mortals, and ultimately I don't think I'll give that away. There's another character that comes in later that she raises that is more maybe to her liking, because is cruel and cold and sort of this way, very very arrogant. So Achilles was arrogant, but to me he wasn't arrogant other than the fact he knew who he was, really, which is a point I'll talk about more in a minute. But after women, the other thing that always strikes me in reading about the ancient world is animals. I don't think I would want to be a woman in the ancient world, and I sure wouldn't want to be an animal because they practice animal sacrifice daily. And they think nothing of it. So it always bothers me to read that, because we think of the Greeks, or I do, being an American, which is the U.S. is a derived culture from Europe, so it's derived from European culture. So we have this connection as well to Greece and Greek myth and Greek stories, and so I always, and the wealth of the sort of the home of democracy, and so I always think of them as sort of this enlightened cult civilization that existed that sort of founded Europeans, but they were violent and as well as obviously what I would consider barbarous in this sense of animal sacrifice to the gods. And it's just sometimes it's really hard for me to read that. But, I think ultimately this story is about, be who you are, because Patroclus has to be who he is, and Achilles has to be who he is. And, Patroclus was a disappointment to his father. He's not athletic. He's not a good warrior. He's not a good soldier. He's not good at any of these kind of things. And so even if he were, he does try, but, he just has to accept who he is. And Achilles, by the same token, is just born to be this graceful, soldier. And since he's a hero, and this takes place in the mythical age of Greece during the mythological era and the heroic era, he is destined for this role, even though he doesn't particularly have a grievance against Troy, or care what happens to Helen, or care about the honor of Menelaus or Agamemnon. He doesn't care about any of that really, but ultimately he has to be who he is, and that is, leading the Myrmidons in the fight against Troy. So, ultimately that's, I think, Thetis has to be who she is. She's a goddess. She's just, and they all accept each other for kind of who they are. Achilles, and I think that's the beauty of this love story then between Achilles and Patroclus, because they love each other, they know, they understand each other, they accept each other for who they are, even though they're quite different. They go through life with this acceptance of each other, and I think that's really the beauty of their love story. So this is kind of a love story, not my usual thing to read necessarily, but it turns out to be very beautiful and very well done, mixed in with the action of the Trojan War and the actions of the deities, etc. So it was just a really good experience. I really don't know why I waited 3 or 4 years to read this book, because it was very enjoyable. So I'm really glad I read it. I do have my next book I have started, and it is a book told of the Odyssey from the perspective of Penelope. So I'll have a similar kind of book coming up next. My next book chat will be about that book, which should be coming up soon. So stay tuned for that. I think I'll stop there. Again, love the book. It really was exceeded my expectations, and I'm so glad I did finally read it this year. So that's it. I will catch you at the next video. Take care. Bye.